am delighted um, that the Brown Club of Boston has made it to the elite of the One Bear, One Book. And we look forward to, I have another idea that I'll be discussing with Lisa in the future. But tonight, I want to have all of you recognize our author, whom there she is. She's right next to me. Very good. And Jessica Keener is a very successful graduate of a program, a master's program at Brown for creative writing. And I wonder, Jessica, if you can, give us a little bit of background about what preparation you got in that program, what got you there, what did you get from it, and what tools do you think follow you in your career that came from Brown?
Good questions. Sure. Hi, everybody. So happy to be here. I was the few years leading up to applying to the program at Brown, was in the hospital getting a bone marrow transplant for a fatal disease that I had called aplastic anemia, which took up several years of my life in my early 20s. And thankfully, I had a match for that. Went through the bone marrow transplant procedure, which was highly experimental at the time, and I think there were only maybe 100 of us in the world that underwent it at that point. It's much more common now. And so then I went through that, recovered, and was sort of a budding writer, was writing poetry and was taking some poetry courses at Boston University and starting to move into shorter fiction work. And I decided to apply to Brown because after I got out of the hospital, I was not allowed to sort of re-enter society for a whole year. My immune system needed to develop. So I was home and I was reading massively, reading a lot of Southern authors, Flannery O'Connor in particular. And I saw that Jack Hawkes, who was at Brown, had a correspondence with her. I was reading these letters by Flannery O'Connor, which were just so riveting. And so that got me excited to apply to the Brown program because Jack was there and I thought, well, and he must have known Flannery O'Connor. So anyway, I did apply. Applied also because I loved the way the program was structured. It was a 2-year program, and for each semester we would take a writing class, but then you could choose whatever else you wanted to take for a second class. So, if you wanted to take photography or science, it didn't matter. And I just really liked that structure. And thankfully I got in and got a full scholarship to go. And so spent 2 years there. And I think the thing that I found amazing, it was a very small program. There were only 8 of us in the fiction group. And so to be with someone like Jack Hawkes, who's died, but just was, I don't know, did anybody here know him or remember him or heard of him? Incredible novelist and unbelievable orator, so compelling and charismatic, and just a fascinating personality.
Yes, I studied with him too, and I also got to do the group independent study projects that got invented about that time.
Oh.
Got to do a couple of semesters with him that were wonderful.
Oh, what did you study? What did you study with him?
I think it was the modern American novel, as I
That's
recall.
fantastic.
But then the group independent study project was sort of a women's study thing, which we didn't have women's studies then. We had women though.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And that was a terrific group as well. We did, we read The Bell Jar, which we couldn't even get hold of at the time, and so forth.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because there were these women, well, they weren't all women, but a lot of them, short story writers from Portugal and Brazil, and that, so there wasn't a course offered with those writers. And so I created a curriculum for myself and had an independent study with the head of the Portuguese Brazilian study, department head, and I would read these short story collections and then meet with him, and I would write about a 3-page paper, and I would read the paper to him, and then we would talk about the collection. And that was just amazing because I was so very interested in those stories and the style of the writing. And I was, again, Brown allowed that. So I'm so glad you raised that, Robin, because I definitely took advantage of that. And then I took it, and then I, with another colleague of mine in the fiction program, together we also designed another class in sort of American short story writers, and did the same thing where we would write these short sort of 3-page papers and present them each week that we met with this professor. So I loved that. I just thought that was an incredible opportunity, and just having the time to write, to be in a setting where the culture around me was supporting this work that I was doing that is often not supported by society. So I just found that unbelievable to have that kind of time to write. And so I worked primarily on short stories at that time. And I actually won a second prize in the Red Book Magazine short story contest while I was there at Brown. So that was exciting. And in between my 2 years, I also worked at the Atlantic working for the senior editor there at the Atlantic, Michael Curtis, who died this past year, reading what we call the slush pile. So I sat in this room, and I think every week they probably got 200 short story submissions in brown envelopes.
Wow.
And I would read through them. Never, I didn't read them start to finish, because you could know within the first 3 or 4 pages whether it was something that I should read to the end and potentially recommend to the senior editor, who would then take a closer look at it, or just put a slip in saying, thank you, try again, or something like that. So that was an amazing experience as well. So that was all around in the Brown during my 2 years at Brown. So in terms of what I carried forth from that, I think again was this respect that I felt from the university and the program for what I did, and to feel that at sort of this very young developmental point in my writing journey, I think was a great way to start, because again, I think a lot of writers just have to kind of muddle along, and you've got to juggle other things, jobs, and how you're going to manage that along with your writing activity. So
Jessica, how long was it between the time that you finished at Brown and that you published Night Swim?
a long time, actually, because I worked on short stories first. So I spent a lot of time in stories and submitting to literary magazines. Bless you.
Oh,
And then I tried to write a novel that is in my closet, so which I didn't publish. And it was only really when we adopted our son and I became a mother that I felt this compulsion to write the story that I wrote, which is Night Swim. And so that was really, I want to say, well, at least, I don't know, 15 years maybe, or something like that, before I really said maybe 10 or 15 years, something like that, before I sat down and wrote Night Swim. And that took me a long time to write as well. That was I got, well, I don't have to hold anything back because you hopefully have read it, but I got stuck on the crossroads in the story in terms of whether the mother should die or not. And I just got stuck there. I had the hardest time. I felt like I knew she had to die, but I just didn't want her to die. And that slowed me down. So once I got through that, it kind of, then I wrote it more quickly.
That raises a question that as someone who enjoys reading novels but has never written one, I wonder, did you start out when you wrote Night Swim with a total understanding of where you were going? Or do you get your inspiration by just outlining a few things and characters and then fill in the gaps? Or is there another way?
Yeah, well, there's many ways, and every writer, I guess, will give you a different answer, but, so I love that question. I don't have a full view of what a book is going to be when I get started, but I do have a strong sense of sort of something on an emotional level that I'm trying to get after or unravel or sort of put some puzzle pieces together. And in this case, for Night Swim, um, this was a story in my own life that haunted me for until I wrote this book, which was when I was in junior high. We had in where I grew up in Newton, junior high started in 7th grade, so we formed a new group. We left, and one day someone from our new group came back and said that someone else in our group, her mother had walked into the river and taken her life, and so that was just a mind-blowing experience to have at the age of 12 or 13. I don't think I was even 13 then. Um, and it was at a time in the early, but around the time of Night Swim, 1970 or 1969, something like that, where people just did not talk about things like that. So it was whispered and everybody knew, and there was an article in the paper, and I went home and told my parents, but then nothing was discussed. The teachers didn't round the students up to talk about, how we can help our friend during her grief and this horrible thing that had happened to her in her life. So we didn't talk about it, and we all tried to just carry on. And, I watched my friend trying to carry on and sort of be a normal person, which, she no longer was. And it haunted me. And it also haunted me, in terms of thinking about my relationship with my mother and, what does it mean to be a mother? So I think finally when I did become a mother, when we adopted our son, I just sat down and started to formulate a very different family dynamic. It's the story in the here is not the story of my friend, but created a story that had a mother who wasn't functioning and removed, and where the and who we lost, and then the children had to deal with that loss. So
Well, thank you for that, for all of those answers. I think I've used enough time to warm up to the specific discussion of the book itself. But I might come back later with a couple of other follow-up questions. But Lisa, I think let me pass things on to you, um, and of course to the audience, and hope that there'll be some very provocative questions or provocative answers, even if the questions aren't provocative.
mhm.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is not to put anyone on the spot here, but hoping that some people here had the chance to read Jessica's book, and if you had any questions for her about the content or the process or anything of that nature, or if
I
it's
do.
just, oh, great.
Great,
I
great.
would love, I had no idea what the format of this was. This is my first time coming. I had no idea the author was going to be here. I guess I didn't read the email very carefully, but it's super exciting and I'm delighted. I had two questions. I'll just give you them both. They have nothing to do with each other, but you can decide how you want to. One is I was really interested in your inspiration for Elliot.
Hmm.
Such an unusual character, and there was something just that really just moved me about him and how you constructed him and fit him into the life of the family and how he held his own space in the middle of that family. And I was just really interested in him. And the other thing I was interested in is I got the impression that your writing style changed, that the sentences got longer and more complex in the second half or so of the book. And I didn't go back and look, and I could maybe go check if I'm right or not, but I just wondered, do you feel like you wrote differently over the course of the book?
Mm. That's a wonderful question. I don't know if I was conscious of it. You know, I think that there could have been a change. As I said, I was struggling with letting the mother go, and there might have been some change in how the emotion was delivered after that, possibly. That might have been reflected also in the character who, you know, suddenly was sort of thrust back into a kind of a wild, uncontrolled life. I mean, it sort of already was. There was a lot of out of control around her, but then that was just kind of, you know, the cork popping, I guess. So I
Mm.
can't say that it wasn't a conscious thing. And I'd be curious to know what other people think about that question. Because there is a shift too for the character in terms of the experience of what she went through in the book. In terms of Elliot, you know, as a parent, I went through a lot of special ed stuff in the school system, and saw, you know, just a lot of labeling and special ed, and I just wanted to get behind the label and sort of just get inside a character who, you know, I don't know how if some labels came to mind for you when you talk about Elliot at all, or an association that you made that.
Well, Robert struck me more as somebody who would get labeled special ed.
Mhm.
Elliot, no, I didn't. I just experienced him as sensitive, imaginative, and attuned to something that a lot of people didn't attune to. And I didn't have I had a sense of that he was somebody who, as he grew older, would have to figure out how to channel his sensitivity because it wasn't something that would be socially acceptable, but he was still little enough. that He could have his animals talking to each other or something, but it seemed more like a little kid than like a kid who was, you know, who would get labeled in some way. You were intending him to be a kid who would get labeled, like the
Yeah,
kind of
well,
who would have
I
gotten
guess no, but I have found that readers have asked me, you know, or probably more with Robert, you know, was he you know, autistic or Asperger's or something like that. But I was interested in the qualities that you just talked about with Elliot as a boy. And you know, we raised a son, and I guess I feel like, again, our culture just squashes sensitive boys. And so that was interesting for me to sort of create a character and get inside that and explore that.
Thank you. It's very moving what you're saying. Thank you.
Thanks for asking that question.
And I wanted to talk about the mother. I had lots of thoughts about her. First place, I wanted to clarify. When you said you didn't know if for a while if the mother was going to survive or not, was her crisis still going to be a central point of the book, but she might not have lived? Because to me, her death is like the focal point.
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew that, but I just was having my own issues around again, for me, when I'm writing, I really do try to inhabit the characters and their emotions, and that can be difficult sometimes. And in this case, maybe because of what I experienced with my girlfriend when she was younger, that I had to really experience that loss, and that's what hung me up. I mean, I think I knew it was inevitable that I mean, the novel was heading that way, and that's what it's about, a lot of it. But I was just remarking that it took me a long time to sort of emotionally allow myself to fully feel that experience and go through it. And I think
Yes.
that was, part of my own, perhaps a healing process for me.
Well, you presented it in such a way that I was sure that you must have experienced that yourself. It was very authentic to me.
Mhm.
The other thing I was thinking about, and I haven't done the second read yet. So I don't know whether I've changed or you changed or the book changed or whatever, but before the mother well, she had the event with the car and the lake and everything. Before that happened, I didn't think Sarah was so crazy about her.
Mhm.
I had a pretty negative view of her. And then later, retrospectively, her stance seems to be very different now that she's lost her mother. I mean, I don't know that that's unusual, but I just wanted to comment on it.
Well, again, Sarah was, of it coming of age, 15, 16, and I think it would be natural that she's trying to pull away and find her own identity. And her mother was, I think, a difficult, kind of hard to get a hold of and removed, and not providing certain emotional solace or insight even. And so that there was that tension for Sarah of, looking for a more nurturing influence in her life and sort of resenting that she wasn't getting that from her mother. But then at the same time, it's her mother. So when you lose
Mhm.
someone, you also lose the things that you maybe never had with that person that you can't
Well, that's
recapture.
where I was thinking, so where I was going with that too, because I think that what she didn't have a chance, Sarah didn't have a chance to get past that phase with her mother,
Yeah.
where everything
Right.
her mother does is wrong and everything she does is wrong.
Mhm.
You know, probably we've all been there at some point, but she doesn't get a chance to resolve that and ally
Mhm.
herself with her mother again.
Mhm. And I think that's part of the difficulty and the grieving.
Thank you.
Or you have a question?
Can I go now? Um, so Jessica, I really, really enjoyed the book, and I didn't actually physically read it. I actually listened to the audiobook,
Oh, wow.
which it was just very riveting for me that
Hmm.
way. I just got very involved in the story. But talking about loss, I felt like there were multiple losses in the book. Maybe the loss of the mother was kind of the central loss, but I was very, very interested in Sarah's relationships with the housekeepers,
Mhm.
and especially Dora.
Mhm.
It seemed like Sarah was looking for a mother,
Mhm.
maybe in that sort of emotional sense of a mother. And I think I love the way Dora was portrayed because their relationship kind of evolved.
Mhm.
And also to compare that relationship with the relationship with the first housekeeper we met, whose name I just
Mhm.
can't remember, but she was younger, and I felt like Sarah was almost a little more kind of infatuated with her, or just very, curious about her. And then
Mhm.
her relationship with Dora was almost a little more mature, but I
Mhm.
felt there was sort of a mother piece to it, particularly towards the end of the story.
Mhm.
So I thought that was very well done. And even the loss of their house, there were just so many:
Right.
loss of Peter,
Right.
loss of her mother, and then, there was just loss upon loss. So
Mhm. Mhm.
it was just very well done, I thought.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm curious to know, I know Stafford, you wanted to say something, but I'm curious to know if anyone else had anything to say about the black maids in the story.
A little bit at the end. I must say, I got the book a bit late. I didn't have enough time to read it thoroughly. I generally like creative nonfiction. But I'm the oldest person, I think, here on the panel. I graduated in 1956. And I loved the book unexpectedly. because because it's not my style book. But for example, on page 17, burned leaves. You speak about burning leaves. That's something I totally miss now. We can't do that anymore. When I was a kid, we raked up leaves and burned them in the street. Well, that's one of many associations. I agree, in my mind, the loss of the mother, the death of the mother, was a major turning point in the book. She dies on page 128. It took a while before I realized that this was a major turning point. And you sum up beautifully, beautifully at the end what this all meant to Sarah on page 279 or so. It left a hole in her heart, a motherless child. She leaves home to meet people who are out there to heal and embrace me. That, to listen and applaud my performances. That's the summary, I think, even though it's at the end of the essence of the book. When I was growing up, mothers were the nurturer of children. The father really was the provider. Things have changed now, but then, and I think in the setting of the book, the father wasn't someone who would nurture the child, who would support the child's every move. No helicopter fathers in those days, and the mother in this case was busy socially and involved in all sorts of things. And the mother wasn't, as was said, the primary nurturer in the sense, but her loss made Sarah realize she had lost what was perhaps an imperfect nurturer at that stage in her life. Now, to answer the first question you asked me, or the question about Dora, the housekeeper, is the only one who seemed to understand and care about Sarah. So that's my comment there, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for your insights.
Hi.
Hi.
So Jessica, thank you for this beautiful book. And this is my first time here too, and I had no idea you'd be here. I'm so pleased and honored that you want to share your thoughts about it with us. I found the book really gripping and couldn't put it down, kept looking forward to going back to see what was going to happen next. And you had it really packed. There was a lot in that book. And so there's so many things I'd like to comment on. I think one, as I'm listening to everybody, I'm just reflecting on her parents did like very little parenting. And so the Black maids, Luann and Dora, were really like it was a very, I mean, I know that's something that happened at the time and it's realistic, but as a writing device, it was lovely the way you showed, look, here's how parenting ought to look. And she wasn't getting that. I mean, her mother was addicted and really wasn't going to come back, I don't think. And her father was impossibly selfish, and nobody was paying any attention to the kids. It, it was very interesting to see that and think about what happens to children that grow up not parented. I mean, they weren't parented. They had a home to be safe in and fed, but not parented. So I thought that the Black maids did a beautiful job of just being normal, natural parenting figures within the confines of their role. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, she, echoing what, who was it that said that? Was it Marianne? What people have said about how many losses she encountered. She got walloped. I mean, Peter takes off because the family's so dysfunctional and he can, and she's stuck. She's stuck. And then, her mom, there's that sort of ongoing insult that children of alcoholics or children of addicts have, where they lose every day. They have that jarring experience of why am I not cared for? Why is she not present? So, the mother she missed, I think, was a mother she probably lost long, long ago, or maybe never even had at all. But she missed having a mother. So I'm thinking of this sequence of wallops. She tries to cope by having these affairs and getting lost in coming of age sexually, and gets pregnant, has to have an abortion. She really does keep landing on her feet. But as you wrote her character, when you envisioned her, how did you envision her getting her feet back under herself?
That's a great question too, which I think goes back to what Bill asked me in terms of, did I
Yeah.
have the whole picture? Did I know where? And I would say, I discover as I write. So
Mhm.
I learned who Sarah was, and then sort of Sarah led the way for me in terms of how the kind of person that she seemed to be.
Mm.
And so I didn't have it all outlined out ahead of time, but
Yeah.
with each experience that she had, it sort of informed me as I was writing. So I guess
Yeah.
that,
Okay. And you bring us to her graduation, and then there's that brief coda, but you bring us to her graduation, and we're waiting to see, how does she pull herself back together? We see that she does. It would be great to hear more about that process if you ever want to write a sequel.
oh, in terms of how she pulls it together, you mean in terms of from where she is as a 16-year-old to the adult?
Yeah.
Yeah, several people have mentioned that. I haven't ruled that out, honestly.
Yeah, thank you. So Jessica, yeah, I really was taken with this book. I think Robin used the word authentic, and it really struck me, like it took me back to what it's like to be a teenager. And two things I was going to comment on. I mean, one, so I have a daughter by adoption, and 10 years ago, my husband died. And I remember, for me, I had the support of a lot of friends and family, people I could talk to. But for my daughter, she had supports, but this thing with kids that age, it's so isolating. And I thought you captured that so well, like what it is like for a young person to go through something like that. And especially back then, I mean, my daughter's time, like now they're grief camps and that, but that you can have these friends and you just can't talk about it with them. So that really struck me as like very authentic. And the other thing, as we talk about loss, it seemed to me that the other thing of Jessica loss, she really lost her family. Like she lost her family the way it had once been. I mean, that image of like now they're eating in the kitchen and just sort of standing around, and the whole what it had all once been, even though it wasn't much, crazy and dysfunctional, it was like what she knew her family to be, that just like overnight was gone. That struck me as well.
Excuse me, I can't resist asking whether that the fish tank was sort of a symbol of that.
I have to say I love that scene, if I may. But I had fun writing it at any rate. You know, it was just such a wonderful, I suppose, symbol, metaphor, and focal point for everything just breaking apart, and then this new person coming in and trying to put it all together again, and how it drew the kids, and in each of the ways that they managed that particular manageable disaster, right? I mean, that's something that was fixable. Go to the store and get a new fish, you know.
And I liked it also just because I like the amount of detail in it
Mm,
as a sort of what was supposed to be an ordinary day.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, you know, again, because a lot of the book is about the young children too, and young children with their pets. I mean, that's sort of our introduction often, you know. First it's the turtle. I don't know if any of you had turtles, but or the goldfish, as something to care for, and you know, children's way of learning how to nurture. So I liked using it for that. But again, some of these things are not conscious until later for me.
I guess I can go. Mine's not really a question for you. I just wanted to share that I think like my favorite books, when I get a novel and I want to get just swept away by it, the ones that do that are the ones that resonate with me because the characters are either in a parallel that I was in, or I just really relate to the situation. And this one, Jessica, you nailed it. I mean, we had a black maid who actually was my grandmother's helper for my mother. And when my mother got married young and had me, she came and stayed with us. And my mom was a working mom before that was the norm. And so I never, unlike Sarah, I never felt that I didn't have a mother. I mean, I was very close with my mom, but she also died very young. So there were so many things in this story that I just kept going, okay, I get it. I get it. Our family is Jewish. I get it. I get it. It's so many things. I mean, you really just nailed it. And I really liked it. My big evolution from the start of it towards the end was, yeah, she went through all of these crazy dysfunctional things, and yet people tend to focus on the loss. And that's been a lot of this conversation here. What I take away from it, and the way I feel like my life has been too, is that yes, there's loss, but everybody has loss, but it's how you rebound from it. Like there was a lot that that Sarah had going for her. She had all these opportunities of teachers who sought her out and helped her with her music, and you know, she had the support of her black maids that were there for her. That's a positive. It's not just the negative of the parents being dysfunctional, but it's that she wasn't left to fend for herself. She did have her community, even if it wasn't, you know, Wally and what's her name, Cleaver. But you know, I really enjoyed it. It was a really good read, and I'm delighted that you're here too, because hearing what you have to say about it is really cool. And if you had told me that whether or not the mom was going to die, or where in the story that was going to be part of, if that was a maybe, I would have been surprised, because that was so important to the story and made such a difference. The only other comment I wanted to share was that maybe this was, I had a really good friend who came from a really dysfunctional family. And when she would come around other families, she always thought that everybody was pretending like to be TV families. Like she thought that the norm was the dysfunction because her family was so messed up. And I kept thinking about that too, as I was reading this, like, is this my friend Sue's family, or is this more like my family? It was just really fun to put myself in there and see it from different perspectives. So thanks.
Mm.
It's good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark?
Hi, Jessica. I really enjoyed this book very much. And one of the many wonderful things I think you did in terms of construction was the scene at the cocktail party
Mhm.
where after that everything the shit hits the fan, and the way you wrote that final piece of that party scene where the father is sneaking out to the bushes or whatever with his mistress, and there's the glowing cigarettes was fantastic. And they're like, okay, this is something's big is gonna happen, but then this kind of cascading series of disasters. And I wanted to ask, just starting from the cocktail scene itself, could you talk about that and the dancing and sort of a ritualistic dancing going on, and sort of power dynamics are being displayed through the dancing, and then that the cigarettes, and then boom, the mom tries to kill herself, and then she finally succeeds. Can you talk about that sequence and how you put that together?
Well, I was interested, in that time period. I mean, I have my own interest in appearances and how some people will drive through a neighborhood and you'll look at beautiful homes and imagine, oh, everything is perfect inside there. I grew up in a very nice home in Newton, and everything was not perfect inside our home. So I never had those kind of thoughts. And I think I was interested in, I mean, I think that sort of was a little bit of an example of a certain type of group of, Jewish upper middle class-ish people that would have these parties. And I saw those parties as a young girl growing up also, and didn't, as a young girl, didn't understand what was happening while with all the drinking and the smoking and the dancing. But I just I don't know why I'm attracted to that kind of party scene, because I think it's, the setup is you're all supposed to be having a good time and it's supposed to be fun, and yet all these other sort of strange, somewhat dysfunctional maybe, or repressed things emerge in those settings. And the party is sort of a controlled fun that can then always push against the boundaries of and then into uncontrolled fun. And I guess I'm just fascinated by those kinds of dynamics. I don't know if that answers your question. I think I was leading up to, you know, the event, which would be the death. And that there are probably a lot of ways when people are suffering that they're trying to cope or they're trying to contain their suffering. And a party might be one way. I had fun writing that scene too.
Well, it looks like we have about 10 more minutes. Does anyone have any burning questions that they'd like asked?
I had one, if I can go again, if that's okay.
Please.
Sure.
Yeah. So I just want to follow up on what Elisa, is that how you say your name? Elisa said about Elise, sorry,
That's okay.
about the positives. And I thought a really strong positive influence in Sarah's life was her friendship with Sophie. That was really, I thought, very well done, and especially the way she really, accompanied her, when she had to go for the abortion. So I think that was another very positive, just that support of a friend. But I do have a question. And as I said, because I listened to the audiobook, I couldn't really go back and find where this particular scene was. But you sort of gave us a sort of fast forward to Sarah as an adult, and she was in California and she was singing. And I forget where that came in the book, but I was just curious why you placed it where you placed it. I don't think it was right at the beginning, but maybe it was. As I said, I couldn't go back and check that, but maybe you could just comment on that.
Well, there were, I think, four interludes, and I think in the beginning, there's a reference to her singing because she's emailing with an old neighbor, and he's making a comment about her,
That's right.
record. So,
Yeah,
there's sort of a nod to that, and then and she is going to an event, so those interludes sort of touch back to that, sort of stitch through the book a little bit in terms of that adult time.
I see. Okay.
I think again, I was the idea of Sarah doing doing a metaphorical night swim through her psyche, of going back to into that darker time in her life, informative time, allowed me to bring in some adult perspective,
Mm,
even though I'm going into, it's being told via a 16-year-old. There's a certain layer of the adult infused in her perspective,
mm,
in the storytelling, at least as I see it.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Linda?
Did you call on me? Okay. I don't have a question, but I do have a compliment. Your writing was absolutely magnificent. The description of Elliot was brilliant, truly wonderful. And I read the book, a while ago, and I reread it a couple of days ago, and I was so glad I did, because I got so much more out of it. But I went back to read it because I wanted to kind of enjoy the language. And there was I wrote down this one comment. This deep hour, when husband and 3 sons dissolve like particles in a sea. And that was I believe it was describing the mother and how she kind of went into this haze, at the cocktail hour. But your writing was absolutely inspired, and that whole few pages on describing how Elliot navigated the family, and how and it said in the story that the mother pretty much abandoned them emotionally and physically when he was born. After he was born, she got very involved in the country club then, and was away from home a lot. So Elliot really had to raise himself and learn how to navigate this terrible situation he was living in, and retain his sanity and composure. Anyway, your writing was just wonderful, and I look forward to reading another book, perhaps your latest. And but no one had really commented on just the style of the writing. The story was wonderful. And the way you dealt with her suicides attempts, and I think she committed suicide by stopping in the middle of the intersection. That's the way I read it. And also how well you handled the sexual scenes with Sarah and the 2 boys that she had relations with. I mean, that was handled so delicately, but one knew what was happening. Your writing was just lovely. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that so much. That's
I would
wonderful.
second that, or third it, or whatever. There are a lot of heads nodding, but I especially like your use of simile. I kept
Mhm.
finding things where you're taking a fairly pedestrian setting, but then when you interject these visuals into them, for example, she was standing up too quickly, as if she were sitting on a pincushion full of prickly guilt. Really, it just spiced it a little bit, or flavored it, and enriched it. I really enjoyed that.
No, thank you. I do like the challenge of taking everyday objects and having them resonate to something larger. I do I have a certain fascination with that, I guess. That I think everything is, you can use anything in that way around you, you know.
Bill, I just wondered if you had any extra thoughts on your end before we kind of wind down.
Well, one, I just want to say how wonderful this discussion has been. The people who were present read the book, thought about the book, and came prepared to discuss it, and that was wonderful. My final question to the author is: this is your first, Night Swim is your very first book. You've published since, and I think you have something in the future. Could you give us a little sense of what happened after Night Swim?
Sure. Well, I have to say thank you all really for all your comments. It's really an honor, and I value everything that you all bring to the book. I continue to learn about my own book in that way. So I wrote a collection of short stories called Women in Bed. And that's pretty much, a lot of the stories in there are linked stories. There's a recurring character and there is a certain arc, and a lot of the women are in their sort of mid-20s or something and going through heartaches and loneliness and depression, all my favorite subjects, anxiety. Then I wrote a novel called Strangers in Budapest, which is set in Budapest in the mid-1990s. And there's a little bit of a psychological suspense element to that. And I've just completed a novel, again, back to a family setting in Boston, in contemporary 2019-ish, that involves distrust and betrayal with these two families, and weaving in a sort of ancient Jewish practice called the counting of the Omer that informs how these two families manage these painful wounds, and whether they can heal from them and learn to love in a different or better way. So that's the novel I've just finished. Evening Begins the Day. And then I'm now actually working on a memoir-ish book about my experience as a 22-year-old with a serious life-threatening illness. I've kind of put that off, and I've written about it in essays that I've published here and there, and finally kind of putting the whole thing together as a book. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
I just have to say, I think it's very unfair to ask the author about all these great books she has written or has just written, and now we have to go. Just that. It's like, oh, now I have all these other questions.
Well, feel free to, get in touch with me and ask me. I love the questions. It's really, it's wonderful to write a book, but the whole point is to share with readers. And I love to see how a book can take a life of its own, outside of
And I
my
hope it's
control.
clear that I was joking, right? Like I was just enthusiastic, but I wasn't actually complaining.
Oh, for sure. Jessica,
It was clear.
Jessica, can you just drop your contact info into the chat just in case people have follow-up questions
sure.
for you, or, just want to pick your brain about style? Yeah.
Yes, feel free. Just email me. I'm happy to be in touch. It's really a privilege. I love talking about just your perspectives and how you see things. And as a fiction writer, primarily, it's just a great pleasure. So
Where are you located?
I live in Brookline, Massachusetts.
Beautiful downtown Brookline.
What's that?
Beautiful downtown Brookline.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a great walking city. And I've lived in other places. I've lived in Miami. I've lived in Budapest. I've lived in Portland, Maine, Atlanta, Georgia. But we've been here for about 25 years. And I grew up in Newton, so I don't know if any of you know that town either.
I used to work in Newton schools.
Oh, you did?
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I can't really see the title of the book that you're holding up, Robin. Is there a title on that?
No, still can't see it. I can see 3 words.
Robin, you're muted, so I can't hear you either, but it's a, is
And I
it,
signed my treasured signed copy of The Blood Oranges.
Oh, my goodness.
And I had
That's
folded,
That's Jack Hawks, my teacher.
I had folded in the back of it. And this
Wow.
signed it in November 1971. And in September 71, there was a whole piece about him in the book in the New York Times Book Review.
Oh, wow.
Sort of see him there.
Yeah.
They said,
Wow.
the sixth and most accessible novel by feasibly our best writer.
Wow. Yeah, he was quite a
Had a
brilliant
lot of
man.
influence on many people at Brown.
That's so nice that you have that. Wow, thank you.
Oh, Jessica, I live in Newton on the south side in Oak Hill, and I'm
Oh, okay.
not sure which school you went to.
North side.
Oh, the north side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Never
Same
the twain shall meet.
yeah. Well, I think we do need to wrap it up. People need to finish their soup. Those of us on the West Coast need to go get dinner for ourselves. I just want to thank you, Jessica, and you, Bill, for bringing this book to us. Obviously, for me, kind of as the creator of this program and helping run it with you know, Emily Deach from the Washington, D.C. Club. What's so wonderful for me is to be have Brown talent shared with me that I might not have been able to find on my own. And for me, this particular book had such a Boston essence, as Stafford pointed out on just numerous like visceral notes. And to me, it was just a wonderful visit to that place and that time, among other things, among the resilience of your character, the resilience of Sarah. So hopefully, if people want to follow up with you, they will do so with that contact info in the chat.
Yes, please do. Don't be shy.
Yeah, and I know Bill already has a book on tap for the Boston Club for One Book, One Bear Season 3. As I mentioned, we do have a couple more events from the Brown Club of Houston, the Brown Club of Miami, the Brown Club of Rhode Island, and that will be shared with you via your Brown Club of Boston newsletter or your regional newsletter, wherever you're coming in from. But Bill, do you just want to really quickly tease people which might come in season 3 from the Brown Club of Boston?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Oh, you were talking about how you might be bringing Ruth Simmons' book to us.
That is correct. I think it's in November.
Oh, that would be amazing.
That we hope to involve Ruth, who's undergone a change in her career very recently. As you probably all know, she's been president of Prairie View, a historically Black university, and has done an extraordinary job there. She had planned to retire from that and maintain her teaching there. But the head of the Texas University of Texas's system told her that she could not hire anybody during the period between now and her planned retirement, which was at the end of the second term. And she's retired early in response.
Wow.
But I am hoping to present her and her book then and make that available to all of the One Bear, One Brown, One Bear, One Book. And I hope to see you all. This has been a wonderful discussion Um, um, uh, Not the least because of the responses that we've gotten from our author to the very good questions that have been raised. I think, just applaud to the author.